Maya was 9 years old when her mother passed away in the quiet of a Tuesday morning in October. It was the kind of morning that feels ordinary right up until it isn't. The leaves outside their small apartment in Cincinnati were turning that particular shade of amber that her mother, Diane, had always called the color of remembering. Maya had gone to school that day not knowing it would be the last time she would come home and find her mother sitting in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, humming something soft and wordless to herself. By the time the school bus brought Maya back that afternoon, Diane was gone. A neighbor had already called the ambulance. The doctors said it was her heart. That it had simply, without warning, decided it was done. Maya went to live with her Aunt Carol in the Westwood neighborhood of Cincinnati, a woman who was kind in a practical, no-nonsense sort of way. Carol made sure Maya was fed and clothed and got to school on time. She was not a cold woman. But she was not Diane either, and Maya felt that difference every single day, the way you feel the absence of a tooth with your tongue, over and over again, even when you know better. The only thing Maya kept from her mother's belongings, aside from a photograph and a worn paperback copy of a book of poems, was Diane's old phone. It was a model that had been outdated even when Diane owned it. A black rectangle with a small crack across the lower right corner of the screen, held together now with a faded strip of clear tape that Diane had applied herself one afternoon while watching television. The phone no longer held a charge for more than a few hours. The camera had stopped working entirely. Several of the apps had long since stopped being supported. But it still turned on. And inside it, preserved like flowers pressed between the pages of a book, were the things that mattered. Voice memos. Diane had recorded herself often. Little moments she wanted to remember. A recipe she was trying for the first time. A funny thing Maya had said at breakfast. Sometimes just the sound of rain against the window, because she had always loved rain and wanted to keep some of it. There were 47 recordings in all. Maya had counted them many times. She listened to them sparingly, the way you eat the last of something precious, making it last as long as possible. She listened to one on her birthday each year. She listened to one on the anniversary of her mother's passing. And sometimes, on nights when the world felt particularly large and she felt particularly small, she would hold the phone to her chest in the dark and press play on whichever one her thumb found first, and she would fall asleep to the sound of her mother's voice describing how to make the perfect pot of rice, or laughing at something the television had said, or simply breathing. The phone became something sacred. Maya kept it charged with a careful consistency that bordered on ritual. She had found an old cable online that still fit the port. She kept it wrapped in a soft cloth in the drawer beside her bed. When she moved from Aunt Carol's house to a college dormitory at 22, the phone came with her. When she moved into her first real apartment at 25, it came again. When the neighborhood flooded one summer and she had to grab only the most essential things and run, she grabbed the phone before she grabbed her laptop. She was 31 now. 31 years old, working as a home health aide in the same city she had grown up in a modest apartment on the third floor of a building that smelled faintly of lemon cleaning solution and the cooking of the family downstairs. She was not wealthy. She was not struggling exactly, but the space between her paycheck and her bills was narrow enough that she was always careful, always precise, always thinking 2 steps ahead the way her mother had taught her. She had a small life, and she did not think of it as small in the diminishing sense of the word. She thought of it as contained. Deliberate. Filled with the right things. She had her work, which she was good at and which mattered. She had her small circle of friends, who were loyal and warm. She had her Saturday mornings at the library, which was a habit she had kept since childhood. She had her window box of herbs, which she tended with more care than some people gave their houseplants. And she had the phone, with its 47 recordings, and the voice of her mother inside it. On a Thursday evening in early March, Maya came home from a long shift to find that the old phone had done something strange. She had left it charging, as always, on the corner of her nightstand. But when she came into her bedroom and glanced at it, she saw that the screen was lit. Not because she had touched it, but because it had, apparently on its own, made a call. She picked it up slowly. The call was still active. 23 minutes, according to the screen. She stared at the number. It was not a number she recognized. The area code was not local. She did not know what to make of it. She ended the call. She set the phone down. She stood there for a moment, frowning gently at nothing in particular, and then she went to make herself a cup of tea, the way her mother always had, to think things through. She decided it was a mistake. A ghost call. Old phones did strange things. The buttons got soft over time, or the screen developed a sensitivity that caused it to respond to pressure or heat. She had read about this somewhere. It happened. She plugged the phone back in and went to bed. But the next morning, there was a voicemail. She almost never got voicemails. The number was one that most people didn't have. She had kept it connected over the years more out of sentiment than practical use. The voicemail was from the same number that the phone had called the night before. She listened to it standing in her kitchen, still in her robe, cup of tea in hand. The voice was a man's voice. Measured, careful, slightly formal in the way of someone who spent most of his time in professional settings and had perhaps forgotten how to be fully casual. He said his name was Lawrence Whitfield. He said he had received a call the previous evening from this number. He said he didn't know who had called, and that they hadn't spoken, and he understood it was likely an accident. But he said, and here his voice changed just slightly, just a fraction, softer at the edges, that the number was one he recognized. That it had belonged, many years ago, to someone he had known. And he would appreciate it very much if whoever had this phone now might call him back, just briefly, just to explain. He left his number, though it was already there on her screen. And then he said thank you in a way that sounded like it carried more weight than the word alone could hold. Maya stood with the tea going cool in her hand for a long time. Then she called him back. He answered on the second ring. She explained, simply and straightforwardly, who she was. That she was Maya. That the phone had belonged to her mother, Diane. That her mother had passed away when Maya was 9. That she had kept the phone all these years because of the recordings inside it. There was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Then Lawrence Whitfield said, very quietly, Diane Carter. And Maya said, yes. And there was another silence, different in quality from the first. The kind of silence that is not empty but full. He said that he had known her mother. That they had grown up in the same neighborhood, though he had moved away before Maya was born. That Diane Carter had been, he said, one of the finest people he had ever known in his life. That she had been kind to him at a time when he very much needed kindness, and that he had never forgotten it, and that he had lost touch with her over the years in the way that life sometimes causes you to lose touch with the people who matter most. He asked, carefully, gently, if Maya would be willing to tell him about her. About who she had been. About her life. Maya sat down slowly at her kitchen table. She thought about all the times she had wished someone would ask her that question. All the years she had carried her mother quietly and alone, without enough people in her life who had known Diane well enough to want to talk about her. Aunt Carol did not like to speak of the past. Maya's few childhood friends had not known her mother well. And so Maya had kept Diane mostly to herself, in the drawer beside her bed, in the 47 recordings, in the amber leaves she still thought of every October. She said yes. They talked for 2 hours that first morning. She learned that Lawrence Whitfield was 63 years old. That he had grown up not far from where Diane had grown up, in a neighborhood in Cincinnati that had since changed beyond recognition. That he had left at 20 to go to college and had not gone back, and had built, over the decades, a business that had become several businesses, and that he was now the kind of man whose name appeared in the financial pages of newspapers, though he said this without pride, more as simple fact, the way you might describe the weather. He had never married. He said this without self-pity. He had been too consumed by work for too long, and then too set in his ways, and then simply too old, or at least too accustomed to his own company. He had a townhouse in Chicago and an office on the 47th floor with a view of the lake that he admitted he rarely looked at anymore because he had grown used to it, which he said was probably a lesson in itself. She learned that her mother had known him as Larry, which made her smile, because her mother had always preferred the shorter versions of names, the more familiar ones, the ones that felt like a hand on a shoulder rather than a handshake. She told him about Diane. About the chamomile tea and the humming. About the way she had laughed, which had been big and unself-conscious and had embarrassed Maya slightly as a child and which Maya would give anything in the world now to hear in person again. About the recordings. About the pot of rice and the rain against the window. She heard something in Lawrence Whitfield's voice shift and settle as she spoke, like a room coming into focus. He said, when she had finished, "Thank you for telling me all of that. I mean that sincerely. Thank you." She said, she would have been glad someone remembered her that way. He said, she would have been glad you turned out the way you did. Maya looked out her kitchen window at the bare branches of the tree in the lot next door and did not say anything for a moment, because there was a tightening in her throat that she needed to let pass before she could speak again. They agreed to speak again the following week. And they did. And the week after that. It became a regular thing, these Saturday morning phone calls, which felt appropriate given that Saturday mornings had always been Maya's designated time for things that fed her soul. They would each make their tea, and they would talk. Sometimes they talked about Diane. Sometimes they talked about other things. About Cincinnati and how it had changed and how it hadn't. About the books they were reading. About the particular quality of silence in early morning before the rest of the world woke up. About the way kindness, real kindness, the unglamorous everyday variety, was the most undervalued thing in human life. Lawrence, she discovered, was funny in a dry, understated way that revealed itself slowly, and she liked him for it. He was also, beneath the measured formality of his professional manner, unexpectedly humble. He had a way of asking questions and then genuinely waiting for the answer, which was rarer than it should have been in Maya's experience. In April, he came to Cincinnati for a business meeting, and he asked if she might like to have lunch. She said yes without hesitation, which surprised her a little, because she was not usually someone who rushed into things. They met at a diner on the east side, not a fancy place, but a good one, the kind with booths of cracked vinyl and laminated menus and coffee that came in ceramic mugs and stayed hot because the server came around often enough to keep it that way. Maya had suggested it and Lawrence had agreed without any visible qualm, which told her something useful about him. He was taller than she had imagined. Broad-shouldered, with gray at his temples and the careful posture of a man who had spent decades in rooms where posture communicated things. He was wearing a dark suit and a tie, because he had come directly from his meeting, and he had loosened the tie slightly by the time he arrived, which felt like an effort at ease that she found endearing. They recognized each other immediately, across the diner, the way you sometimes recognize a person you have only ever known by voice, because voice carries more of a person than people generally credit. He shook her hand, and then, after a beat of consideration, opened his arms, and she stepped into a brief, genuine hug, the kind between people who have shared something real even if they have not yet spent much time together in the same room. They sat. They ordered. The coffee came. He said, looking around the diner with an expression she couldn't quite read, "Your mother would have liked a place like this." Maya said, she loved diners. She said they were the most honest restaurants. He smiled at that. That sounds exactly like something she would say. They talked through lunch and into the afternoon, and when the server came the third time to refill their coffee and ask with gentle patience if they would like anything else, they ordered pie, because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because neither of them was ready for the conversation to end. He told her, over the pie, that he had been thinking about what she did for work. About the families she helped. About the particular kind of dedication it required to care for people who were vulnerable, day after day, without recognition or significant financial reward. He said he had a foundation. That it supported various causes, but that one of its focuses was helping working people who were doing essential, undervalued work to access things that could make their lives more stable. Educational support. Emergency funds. Small grants that could mean the difference between staying afloat and going under. He said he would like, if she was open to it, to connect her with the foundation. Not as charity, he said carefully, meeting her eyes. He was clear about that. He had grown up with enough clarity about the difference between charity and investment to know the distinction mattered. He said it as investment. In a person who was clearly already doing exactly what the world needed more of. Maya looked at him for a long moment. She said, "You don't owe me anything because of my mother." He said, "I know that. This isn't about owing. It's about choosing. Your mother taught me something when I was young and didn't yet know how to receive kindness gracefully. She gave it to me anyway. I've spent 40 years trying to pass that along in whatever way I can. You've spent 31 years doing the same thing, even when no one was asking you to, even when it cost you. I'm not offering you charity. I'm recognizing someone I see clearly." Maya looked out the window of the diner at the Cincinnati street outside, at the ordinary Thursday afternoon passing by, people going about their lives in the unhurried way of a weekday, and she thought about her mother sitting in the kitchen with chamomile tea, and about the 47 recordings in the drawer, and about how strange and tender it was that an old phone with a cracked screen had led her here, to this booth, to this man, to this moment. She said, she would have thought this was exactly the kind of thing that was supposed to happen. He said, she would have been right. Later that year, with the support of the foundation, Maya enrolled in a nursing program she had put off for years, not because she had lacked the desire, but because the timing had never been right and the finances had never been forgiving. The program was rigorous and demanding, and she was older than most of her cohort, and there were nights when she came home to her apartment exhausted in the specific way of a person who is doing something genuinely hard, and she would sit on the edge of her bed and hold the old phone in her hands. She still listened to the recordings. She still charged the phone with careful regularity. She still kept it wrapped in its soft cloth in the drawer. But she no longer thought of it only as something she was holding on to. She had begun to think of it also as something that had, in its own quiet way, held on to her. That had carried her mother's voice through the years and then, in its old age and its fragility, had done one last extraordinary thing. It had made a call it was never supposed to make. And in doing so, it had connected two people who had both been keeping something of Diane Carter alive in different ways, in different cities, for different reasons, and who had found each other across all those years and all that distance and recognized, without much difficulty, the thing they shared. Lawrence called on her graduation day, even before she had called him. He said he already knew because he had marked the date in his calendar months ago, and he wanted to be the first to say he was proud of her, which made her laugh and press the back of her hand to her eyes in the hospital parking lot before she went inside to start her shift as a newly licensed registered nurse. She said, Mom would have made a whole event of this. He said, she would have brought a cake no one asked for and been completely unapologetic about it. Maya laughed fully then, not the polite contained laugh she often offered the world, but the big unself-conscious one, the one she had inherited without knowing it, the one that her mother had given her along with everything else. And somewhere in the drawer beside her bed, in a phone that was more memory than machine now, 47 recordings slept in their quiet archive, filled with the voice of a woman who had known, simply and without pretension, how to love the people around her in the ordinary ways that turn out, in the end, to be the ones that last the longest. The color of remembering, her mother had called the October leaves. Maya understood now that it was not only a color. It was a practice. A choice made again and again, to hold on to what was good, to let it live in you, and to pass it forward into the world whenever you found someone who needed it. Which is what Diane had done. And what Maya was learning, day by day, to do as well.